Welcome to ADF Property, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of the ADF Property Podcast. I'm here with Kane Dury, Discover Buyers Agency. Kane, we had so much fun last time, we had to come back and do it all over again.
Yeah, it was pretty good. We just spent probably 10 minutes talking about last month's episode. So yeah, it's good to be back, exciting.
How has the feedback been from first episode?
Yeah, quite positive. So we're working with like a few defence members at the moment off the back of it, just seeing traffic and interest picking up. So yeah, it's been real positive.
And it's cool because really that was a taste of what is to come. We barely scratched the surface on what Andre had done. There's so many people that are in similar positions or wanting to put themselves in similar positions, and you are in a position where you can help them.
Yeah, so it was such a cool story last month with Andre, and I think we were just mentioning there may be the opportunity to bring him back in. I think 3 months might be a bit soon, but maybe 12 or something and go from there. So
cool. So what's been going on the last month in the world of real estate, of property, of the Australian economy?
Yeah. So I guess we're sitting here on a podcast and it's the day after the Reserve Bank met, so I feel like we need to mention that. But
the elephant in the room
for
all
right.
of us, really.
I think every platform I look at, my entire feed's full of real estate agents and brokers and everyone else with interest rates on hold. So probably not really a surprising decision. A lot of economists were predicting a hold, so they could have gone either up or down. But yeah, a hold sort of made sense. And as they say, when we look at charts and markets, sort of tops are pointy and bottoms are lumpy. And in this case, I guess inflation's a bit stickier than everywhere else. So,
what are your personal thoughts on what this means, especially given the Governor Bullock did come out and say we might not actually change this rate for the next 6 months. At the same time, she also said we did still consider a rate rise. Like there's kind of different perspectives there.
I guess I subscribe to watch what they do, not what they say.
Yeah.
And if we look at, so England in the last month have decreased rates. People's Bank of China have decreased rates. And then the month prior to that, we had the European Central Bank, I think the Swiss and Danish all decreased rates. And so on a global scale, it looks like the economy is clearly softening and weakening. And then if we look at the FOMC or the Fed's next meeting, I think I was checking it out yesterday, 73.5. I don't know how you come up with a 0.5 when you're predicting something 6 weeks away, but that was the figure on the website, that there's going to be a decrease in the US. So I think that sort of indicates that we're not going to see an increase, but who knows?
Well, I guess only time will tell. It's something that we will touch on with the episodes as we go. We'll take a little bit of a deep dive into what is going on in the economy, because it does affect property prices, it does affect sentiment and how people are feeling about the wider market. But
I think you nailed it with sentiment as well. Like it gives people confidence, and that's huge or underestimated. Yeah.
Well, I mean, confidence is a huge thing, and you've got to be confident to be doing a podcast. You do have a guest for us today to be chatting all things property and what's going on. And who is it?
So we got Ross from Strategic Brokers, but British Royal Marine Commando. So welcome, Ross.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're
Pleasure
so welcome.
To be here.
Thank you for coming along. So cool that, obviously ADF Property Podcast, you think it's going to be quite insular into what's going on just within the Australian military, but you've already gone someone...
We're going abroad.
Yeah, how cool.
Straight off the bat.
And he's not a lateral transfer, but nevertheless, he's British Army and living in Australia, so keen to hear his journey.
How did you guys meet?
Through Mr. Sermon. The ultimate networker. So John's a buyer's agent in in New South Wales, and he runs a networking business as well called Bio. And he meets people, and then he goes, "Oh, you need to speak to you, and you need to speak to him," and they just put us in touch, and we've been doing a bit of business ever since.
There you go.
Yeah, so I think I actually met John 1 or 2 months ago when I was in the studio, and then we caught up for an epic sandwich. What's it called?
Tiny's in the
Tiny's
city.
in the city.
If you know, you know.
Yeah, and if you don't, go. And I think we're going to go to Tiny's for lunch today. So anyone that's in Sydney, feel free to join us. Although you'll be listening to this in a week.
Yeah,
so.
maybe don't just show up on a random Sunday afternoon if you're listening to the podcast. But is this episode sponsored by Tiny's then?
Maybe.
We should reach out to them maybe. And
We'll
get
tell
them
them
to sponsor.
today at lunch that we gave them an epic plug to the defence community and see if we can get a free sandwich out of it.
Yeah. So it's really been recently that you guys have become acquainted.
Yeah. I think it was 2 months ago when I was in the studio last, that we've just sort of kept in touch, a few emails and chats here and there,
Yeah, how cool. So what's your background then in the defence space?
So when I was 18, I went to the careers office, like most people will do. Sat there and I was like, what's the highest paying job I could get, straight out of college. So I basically spent 2 years in college just trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I'm not an academic, never have been, so I've always been someone that kind of works with their hands. And the military was one route that I was like, this is something that I would like to do. So it was peak credit crunch at the time, 2009. And I turned up for my final interview to be a winchman in the Royal Air Force. And the guy turned up. Back then it was like, your Nokia 3310 or whatever it was, and your voicemails would come through hours later, texts coming through hours later. And he said, "Did you not get our voicemail?" And I was like, "No." He said, "You've been put on a 5-year waiting list." Since the credit crunch, people are losing their jobs, they're joining the military, and they were taking the older guys, not the younger guys, for the Royal Air Force. And anyway, this Marine was sat there, just got back from Afghanistan. He'd injured his ankle, not in Afghanistan playing football or something, and he got sent to the careers office just for like a stint, just to recover. And he said, "You look like a fit lad. Do you reckon you want to join the Royal Marine Commandos?" I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." He was like, "Can you do 10 pull-ups? Can you run relatively quickly?" And I was like, "Well, I think I'm pretty fit, so yeah." So I did 10 pull-ups in the office, and he said, "Meet me on Friday, you're joining the Marines." So I went back home that day, and my mum was like, "How did your interview go to join the Royal Air Force?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm joining this thing called the Commandos. I have no idea what it is, but that's what I'm gonna do." And that was it. So yeah, went from going down the easy route of the Royal Air Force to essentially the most elite course that you can do probably on the planet, from civilian to military. So it was a pretty wild turn of events.
Do many people, I don't know, do 10 pull-ups in the office and then get an automatic nod, yep, you're in?
Well, it's not, yeah, you're in. It's
There's a bit behind it, obviously.
Yeah, you're fit enough. He basically dragged me down to the park every Friday for the next 5 weeks before he was like, "Right, we're going to put you on a pre-Royal Marines course." So you go down to the Commando Training Centre in southwest England, and you basically go through a 3-day. Essentially, they're trying to determine whether you're suitable to even start training at that point. So they get rid of about 50% just at that stage. So I went down there, did all the tests, passed, and then got put on the next course 8 weeks later. So yeah.
So in the UK, like in Australia, we have a ROSO, which is a return of service. Like for me, it was 6 years because I did my trade, so it's a little bit longer. Did you have a commitment for a certain period?
Yeah, so you do. You have to do a minimum of 4 years after you've passed training.
Yeah.
So it's like training was a minimum of 8 months, providing you didn't get injured. Most guys are around 10 to 12 months because they might fail one of the tests or get injured and get put into rehabilitation. So yeah, essentially 5 years is kind of the minimum. And then they say they can call you back for another 20 after that, but nothing's kicked off yet. So.
Yeah. Watch this space with the economy and World War III.
Yeah. The worst bit was handing your notice in, because you have to give a year's notice in the Marines. Because it takes them a year to train up someone new, so you've got to give a whole year.
Right.
Wow, so it's 1 in, 1 out, basically.
Yeah, it's not like leaving your normal job, 30 days notice. It's 12 months. So
Interesting. So this is 2010 roughly?
2010, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And tell us sort of, well, pre-listing or, we'll lead into the first investment property in a moment, but what was like property and money and things as a kid growing up, but what exposure did or didn't you have? And sort of...
There was no exposure to any money at all, which was probably what steered me down the route of wanting to start my own business or look into property. I kind of got to the final year or two of school and just thought none of this really makes any sense for what I want to do for a living. And I'd always loved property, just like the idea of renovating, getting your hands dirty, taking it from this to this and making a bit of coin on top. So it's always been something that I was interested in. And then when I was about 18, I read a book called The Property Coach. And it was just a story about a family who basically, they broke it down extremely simply. This is what you do. This is where you need to look. These are your rules. You need to buy a minimum of 10% below the market value. You need to get a rental return of X. This is how you work it out. And I was like, okay, this has explained it to me in simple terms. And actually, having joined the military, going from like a kid to a man and being pretty confident at that point, I was like, well, I just need to give it a go and learn on the first one. So it was only maybe after 1 or 2 years after that I bought the first property. It's
interesting how many people get triggered or their journey gets triggered by a book. Like how many guests have you had on over the years, over the various,
Yeah, all of them probably. And some of them probably didn't even say it because it's so just the done thing that someone's read something somewhere and gone, okay, that's what I need to be doing. But
yeah, exactly.
I'm curious. I've had some conversations with people over the years. There's a very different psyche around property in Australia as there is in the UK. Like, what was it like to be over there and wanting to get into property, because it does have a very different
I say
feel around it.
Property and a tax return in Australia is like a sport, whereas in the UK it's buy your own or occupier, pay it off over the next 25, 30 years, make overpayments if you can, and it suppresses people. They don't use it like they do here as a wealth creation tool. They just buy their own or occupier home, they move into it. When I told someone that I'd bought a property I'd never seen, 20% below the market value, and it was renting for X, they were like, you're mad. How are you going to make money doing that? And I was like, well, I'm not going to make money buying one, but if I can build my asset position to 10 of those properties, then I'm making good money. It's all about compounding. But it's very difficult to explain that to someone who's got this narrow-minded sort of view on things. And, like my parents didn't have any money. My mum worked a minimum wage job, still works in a hospital now. And she just kind of wanted to make me happy. There was no man in my life essentially growing up that would, was guiding me down a route of investment or finances and things like that. God knows if I'd had that head start where I'd be now, because, I just didn't have those tools. I had to learn from books, and thank God YouTube's available now on podcasts and things like that, because you can just learn it directly from your Spotify, which is great.
You take it for granted a little bit that we sit here and we talk real estate and property all day, every day, and we talk to these professional guests and investors, and but the culture's still very ripe in Australia, where it is buy a home, pay it off over 30 years, and people just don't know, I guess, there's a better way or another way to do it.
Yeah. I would say that there's the younger generation coming through now that I'll speak to every single day, they are far more aggressive than millennials.
And savvy, like?
Savvy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I was talking to an apprentice the other day. He's on like 40 grand a year. He's buying his second property.
Wow.
Living at home with mum and dad, saving every bit of coin that he can. He put down a 5% deposit on a property. He lives in the Lower North Shore, you know, with mum and dad. He's in his third year apprenticeship. He's not on a lot of money.
Third year.
But he's got no expenses.
Mm.
And he was like, I've just saved. I didn't get sort of, you know, taken into the trade and buy the brand new Hilux. You know, he got, you know, a second-hand vehicle. He didn't overspend, overcapitalise, and he's been saving money hardcore for the last 3 years. He's bought his first one, and he said, "Oh, you know, can I buy another one?" I said, "Yeah, we've got the borrowing power to buy you a second one as well."
It's funny. I had an appointment earlier this week with a nest vestor. So obviously, rent vesting was sort of probably born out of Sydney with just the lower yields in Sydney, and then you know, nest vesting's that next trend where, you know, young adults or kids these days are staying at home with mum and dad and saving that deposit and, you know, just investing and staying at home on the lowest cost living they can. So
It's good for borrowing power because rent's the biggest killer when it comes to that. So
cool. So you mentioned 20% under market value, I heard. Investment Property One. Tell us. So
yeah.
how did you find it? What was, you know, give us some numbers behind it. What was it?
So look, I did what a lot of people have been doing recently in interstate, essentially, and what you would call here interstate investment.
Yep.
So I bought a property up north, and North England is a quarter or a fifth of the price of London or the southeast of England. So, and the yields are much better. And that was like my entry. Like I had £16,000, about $32,000, and I was like, what can I do with the money?
So how far north of London are we talking?
We're talking like 3.5 hours.
Okay,
north.
cool. Yeah, so north.
Like just below Scotland, like pretty far up.
God's country.
You know, yeah. And then, but you can buy property outside the cities, still in dense. Like the UK is very dense, right? So still in dense areas, still in areas which, you know, have got good schools and access to jobs and things like that. So I essentially found this property through an advisor, bit like a buyer's agent, not quite the same thing as what it's sort of marketed as now, but they kind of found you access to opportunities where like a developer had gone under. So this developer had gone under, they were in debt, and they were selling off all the properties. And they had about maybe 10 or 12 properties left that, you know, needed to be sold off to pay the banks back. So they were selling them 20% below the market value to anyone and everyone. And I was like, well, this is a no-brainer. I can put down a 20% deposit. I can buy this property through the defence scheme that we had in the UK. You could buy it on an owner-occupier rate, and you could rent the property out because technically you were outside of the country or living away from that property for
away from home,
essentially. Yeah. So I got the owner-occupier rates, rented the property out, and I've literally just put it up for sale. It's going through settlement at the moment, but I've had that property for 12 years. I've paid the mortgage on it 5 times myself. Paid the council rates 5 times myself in that period. That's nothing. You know, I've released equity from it twice. Once to buy the second property, and once to build a business. I was building a gym back in the UK. So it's made me a lot of money. Like if I look back on how much I'd spent on it and how much I've had in return over the last 12 years, it's like 5, 6, 7-fold what I put into the property.
Yeah. So just high level numbers, if you don't mind, like purchase and sale.
Yeah. So I purchased it for $160,000.
Yep. Aussie dollars.
Yep. Yeah, I'll try and convert it.
So 80 or 90 pound.
Sold it for $280.
Yep.
The mortgage on it was $200 a month at the time. At the time, not anymore. And the rental return, which has always been similar, was around $1,000 a month.
So were you hoping for capital gains when you bought that, or were you more looking for the rental yield?
To be honest, I wanted to learn through that property.
Yeah.
The first one was all about learning. Like, how does this work? How much can I borrow? How easy is it to look after a tenant? Do I need the management company to take 10% off me? I actually realised after 2 years of owning that property that I was just going to do it myself, because everyone was asking for recommendations on Facebook for electricians, for plumbers, to get your gas certificate done every year. So when I needed something doing, I basically just went on Facebook and I said, can someone, and I went into the local group near there and I just said, can someone, give me a plumber? Whoever was recommended the most, that's the guy that I called.
Yeah, nice.
Rather than, because at the start, I was tight on cash. I wanted to maximise how much I was going to make on the property.
Yeah.
It's different when you get to 3, 4, 5 properties, but I do think that people worry so much about getting a tenant in. Like, maybe just use your property manager for a tenant finder. Don't necessarily use them for maintenance. Especially with your first one. Like, what are you doing between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. at night? I'm sure you can solve a couple of emails from your tenant. It's really not that difficult. So I basically made 100% of my rental income for 10 years on it. Yeah. And even when I moved to Australia, I was still doing it myself.
Was there anyone who was doing what you were doing?
No.
So it's not like you had other people around you that you could be like, oh, this is what's happened with mine.
No.
How are you going?
And the thing is as well, I spent all of my 20s figuring out what I wanted to do. So, I ended up moving to Dubai and I ended up doing all these things. But one thing stayed current, and that was I always made money on the property. And having that back, even if it was only 2 properties, through all of that turbulence, going to Dubai, realising it's not for me, coming back to the UK, starting a business, the properties still made me money every single year, no matter what.
Such a good safety net.
Yeah, great safety net.
So there was a second property, but in between there was a little a move to Dubai, 3 years in Dubai via Australia.
Yeah.
So quickly touch on that.
So it was still advertised everywhere, FIFO in Australia, right? And I was like, I'll go and get a job over there. That will suit me. 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It's just like being in the military, basically. Work 12 hours a day, make a bit of money, put it into property. So the day that I discharged from the military, the day after that in the morning, I got a one-way ticket to Australia. At the time, my mum was living in Dubai because my stepdad had a job out there. So I just stopped over to say hello for 2 weeks. And while I was there, this guy was like, they're looking for fitness instructors and stuff like that. So I said, well, I'll go and have a chat with him. So I went and had a chat with this guy and then didn't think anything of it. Flew over to Australia, started doing a bit of landscaping, bit of cash work over here just to get me by in the eastern suburbs. Driving around Rose Bay doing people's gardens out in the sun, $35 an hour or whatever it was back then. And he called me up 7 weeks later. He said, would you want to come back to Dubai and work tax-free for $120 an hour? I said, well, see you later, Australia. And I flew back to Dubai and stayed there for 3 or 4 more years before then going back to the UK again.
Cool. And then I guess that leads into property number 2.
Yeah.
Back to the UK?
Yeah, so got back to the UK. Released equity from the property that I bought when I was 20. Bought the second property. Same again. There isn't the luxury of having a buyer's agent really back in the UK. Not really outside of London or any of the major cities. So I was just calling real estate agents myself and saying, I've seen your advert online. What do you rent this for? Can I speak to your rental team? So I'd speak to the agent. He'd be like, yeah, I'd buy it if it was me. Then I'd call up their leasing team and I'd be like, how much can we rent this for? What do you estimate? Blah blah blah. You'll have no problem with this one, And that's basically I just did it myself.
So in Australia as a buyer's agent, we'll look at things like 3, 5, 10-year growth, vendor discount, days of market, all these sort of data points, and try and strategically pick our markets. But is there anything like that you would do back then? Or was it more just online research and then talking to agents?
My goal back then is different to my goal now.
Yeah.
So I wanted the cash on a monthly basis. So I wanted the rental yield. So to be honest, the capital gains for me wasn't what my aim was. In my brain, I was like, if I can get 10 of these properties and they're all paying me 500 quid a month, that takes over my salary, and then I could figure out how to do this full time. It would basically, pay me $60,000 a year or $120,000 a year, and I could do this full time. So it wasn't in my thinking. Now I know what I know.
Hindsight is so helpful.
Yeah. It's all part of the journey, right? Which is why starting as young as you can is always the best thing, because you'll just learn along the way. But some of the guys we work with now, buyers agents such as yourself, it's an absolute no-brainer.
So the search criteria is more based on the yield than any other real metrics.
Yeah. It was then. Now you want to get a good discount in a busy city, and the rental yield, as you know, the rental market's in crisis, so it's always going to be good in Australia because they're not going to keep up with building demand.
And where to next? So we're two on the board.
Yeah, so we got. So when I moved to Australia, I took some time out, retrained as a mortgage broker. Obviously now work with strategic brokers in the city.
What prompted the last move back to Australia?
So my wife is Australian, and we met in Dubai. She was on holiday, I was living there.
Yeah, wow.
And I dragged her back to the UK, kicking and screaming, because she's from the northern beaches of Sydney, and I took her back to Suffolk in southeast England. So promised her the world that we were going to travel across Europe, and then COVID hits 9 months later, and we're stuck in the house for 18 months. Oh. So she wasn't too happy with me.
Are you still married?
We're still married.
Okay.
Two kids as well. So yeah, I must be doing something right. But yeah, so I took the opportunity coming to Australia it was the first time really since leaving the military that I'd be able to stop and think for a second. So I was quite fortunate position where my wife had quite a good business here, and she sort of said, look, find out over the next 3 to 6 months what you want to do, and retrain. So I was looking into what can I do Monday to Friday in the property space. Well, I can't be a buyer's agent, can't be a real estate agent because you need to work Saturdays and things like that for open homes. I've got 2 young kids. I want to be able to pick them up from school and drop them off. So mortgage brokering kind of that was like the best option for it.
So funny. That was essentially I was looking at it in 2010, 11, and my decision matrix was along the lines of I like a beer on the weekend, so I don't want to work weekends. So I can't be a sales agent. Buyers agents weren't very common back then, especially in North Queensland where I was. So I gravitated, and that's how I started as a mortgage broker as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
But then I found out the redhead in me didn't have the patience for the banks.
Yeah, so that was basically what I did. I landed, I retrained, spoke to a guy. He said, go work somewhere else for a year or 2, figure it out, and then, I might give you an opportunity. So I called him a year later and I said, how about giving me that opportunity? And he said, yeah, come on, then we'll give it a go. So yeah, it's been good. Yeah, it's been good ever since.
And it's been does it feel like the right thing to have done?
Yeah. It's the best decision that I've ever made, and the access to professionals that I have now, and my knowledge of understanding the property market over here, how to get a deal, where the best locations are to buy is, it's incredible. We bought our first one, so we've still got the other 2 in the UK. They're in selling mode at the moment. So they should sort of go through in the next month or 2 and they'll be sold off. But we bought our first one in May this year for $510,000, and I got it valued on a full valuation, not just like a pumped up electronic valuation, for $620,000.
It's money. So 110K.
110 grand,
immediately.
3 months.
I say, 30, 40 under market value, and probably another 60, 70 or something like that in market movement, you reckon? Or
Yeah. And also timing wise, I got a bit lucky with the fact that the person that was buying it and going through settlement, they couldn't get finance, so the opportunity got sent to me last minute, and that settlement period had been so long 4 months. It had 4 months.
So
of
although
growth.
you purchased in May, the
Correct.
price was locked in
The
2
price
months
was
earlier.
locked in December or something like that.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
I'd made 4 or 5 months of growth just by being there at the right time,
Yeah.
which was
And you're
a
the
bit
good-
of luck.
You're the good guy here because you saved the.
I saved it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saved
Yeah.
the deal. Yeah. So and also that area as well didn't have access to a metro line at the time, and literally 3 weeks ago the metro line just opened up in
Oh,
the area.
nice.
So now
Yeah.
they can travel from North Perth all the way into the city in 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's contributed to the growth as well.
Yeah, and that market's still humming along nicely.
Yeah,
You know,
I think
on a
it
month to
will for
month.
another 12, 18 months
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, may slow down, like the pace that it's going at
Yeah,
isn't
correct, yeah.
sustainable, but
Yeah,
still have legs in it for a couple more years.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So strategy then.
Mm.
You've said a couple of times now that it has changed since the purchases you made in the UK. What is the strategy at this point in time with all the knowledge that you now have from working as a broker?
So my strategy now is to build and reach my lending capacity as quickly as possible. So we're going to release equity in the next 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. We'll then buy another one before Christmas. We'll then release equity from that property pretty quickly. We'll buy another one. By the next tax year, I should have 4 on the board for then.
And that's not including the 2 that are being sold.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not including the 2 that are being sold. So it'll be 4 in Australia. And then the asset position at that point should be around $2.5 million roughly. So yeah, that's the strategy now. The idea is, as quickly as I possibly can, I want to get to about $6 million worth of asset. And then we'll let the market do its thing. And then I'll sell off half the portfolio to pay off the other half in full. That's the
Have
strategy.
you reverse engineered this whole thing? Did you start from an endpoint and then?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the goal is that I think everyone needs to have a number because it helps.
It's so important.
Yeah, I just, there's a lot of people that will just go into property and they go, I'll just buy another one with no goals. You know, my goal was to replace my income. So thinking about expenses in the future, inflation, everything else, I was like, right, my number is $240,000 a year. And that's how much I want to make on rental return alone without thinking about, you know, the capital gain on the asset, etc. So I need approximately 8.5 properties paid off.
Yeah.
So call it 9 properties paid off. How am I going to get there? Well, reverse engineer that. I need to probably buy around 18 properties and then let the market double in price, sell off 9 of those properties, and then I've reached my number.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, if you want to tell God a joke, tell him your plans. That's the saying, right? But things will change every single year. But I think regardless of what happens in 5 years' time, right now you've got to have a idea in your mind about where you want to be.
You got to
in
have
the
that
future.
plan, don't you, of what you're aiming and
Correct.
working towards. But you also got to test and adjust and make sure how are you tracking
Yeah.
performance-wise against that plan. So, you know, you're knowing if you're deviating or not.
Yeah, exactly. And the goal might change. You know, I might find a awesome renovation that, you know, in the northern beaches of Sydney or something that's going to make me more money in the future. You don't know what the future holds, but I think you've got to just start and have something in mind. You can review your goals every 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to stick to them. They can change. You know, they can flow and move, and it depends on what the market's doing. But right now, that's the number one goal at the moment. Not to say, and it probably will change in the next year or two.
But it's even just having the systems and processes, isn't it? That
Correct. Yeah, correct.
that's where you do reflect on the goals and
Yeah.
whether they're still relevant to your life.
We say it with our clients all the time. Like, you've got to have access to an A-team. And the good, you know, source point for that is going to your broker, because your broker has been burned by rubbish solicitors, has been burned by rubbish buyer's agents. They've been burned by accountants which haven't done their, you know, looked at your goals and strategized things the way that you want it done. So we can introduce you to all those people. You know, if you want an investment property in Queensland, go speak to Kane. If you want to, you know, use a solicitor in the area, you know, we've got one that we've used over and over again that never messes up, never spells your name wrong on a contract, you know, doesn't, you know,
The little things.
do you know what I mean? Like silly little things that, you know, doesn't check that there's, you know, cement cancer in your building. You know, it's silly things like that which ruin your chances to build wealth. But you know, fortunately, we've been burned by them all, so we know who not to use and who to use.
The broker is the gatekeeper to the debt, and essentially property. You know, if you're only aspiring to 2 or 3 or 4, where most investors get stuck, most brokers will get you there. But property to get to 5, 6, as you're talking 9 and whatnot, it's a game of finance really. So the broker's the gatekeeper to the debt, and the debt's what's going to allow you to do that. So like you said, that A team's very important.
Yeah, 100%.
Thoughts on property managers now?
I like good property managers, but like I'll give you a good example. My property now, the property manager came back to me and said, I think we can increase the rent by $50, and I said, that's not good enough, because this property hasn't been brought up to market rent in the last 6 years. I know the guy's been living there a long time, but interest rates are high, and I'm forking out $1,000 every month into my own mortgage. I need a tenant in there that's going to pay market rate, because I've just bought the property. And unfortunately, this is the game that we play. So I said, it was like $475 she wanted to bring up the rental. I said, no, it's $520 minimum that we're going to bring this up to. So we start negotiations at $520. She calls me back the next day. Oh, we've just signed at $520. I could have taken her advice and I could have said, $475's the mark. Okay, fine, we'll do $475. But actually, sometimes you've got to push back a bit, and you've got to have the confidence to question someone else. She's been working in that area for a long time. I'm looking on realestate.com and Domain at the cheapest rent in the area is $550. Now, my house isn't the best house in the area, but the land size is twice as big as everyone else's. And although the property's not up to scratch, it's not got brand new paint and new floors and everything else, I just looked at it and I thought, it's just way too low. You're $70, $80, $90 a week, which if you compound that over 3-4 years is a lot of money. And yeah, he accepted immediately, which was like, okay, I know that we're in the right ballpark here. So sometimes you've got to question professionals. And I get questioned all the time, is this the best rate that you can possibly get? Or if someone's had a pre-approval for 4 months, I can't be lazy and just sit there and go, stay with Westpac because that's who we did your pre-approval with. The market changes all the time. Oh, actually, while we're going through your settlement period, let me just have a quick check. Actually, ANZ are doing an offer where they can give you $2,000 cash back and they're more competitive on their rates. So while we're going through settlement, why don't we submit an application with ANZ and we'll save you a bit of cash? So I think you've got to, if you're a client talking to professionals, sometimes you've got to question the professional, because you can get slack and you can just do the mundane. And some people do. Whereas for my own portfolio, because I've been through it and done it, I have the confidence to be like, no, let's revisit this. This is where I think the market is, and I'm not sure that you're on point there.
Yeah, it's good advice.
A good property manager is worth their weight in gold, I feel like. When you get a good one, it's that, if sort of like...
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes you'll speak to the owner or the director and they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, they'll sell you the dream of good property management.
Yeah, and then it gets fobbed off to, the new person that's joined the team. And unfortunately, they're just not as... which is why sometimes you have to be like, hold on a second, this isn't quite right.
Yeah, so, and especially with the new legislation and that coming in, you can't afford to not be increasing with the market, because you only got so many opportunities to increase it now. Like, you can't do a 6-month lease in many states and bump it up with the market. You've got to wait that 12-month period. Yeah. So you have to be with the market. I think there's no room for the discounting.
Yeah. I also think that you've got to sometimes put yourself in the tenant's shoes. So once you do buy the property, you do bring it up to market value. At that point, you don't want to be doing these massive jumps every 3 years.
Correct.
I think you're better off being transparent with your tenant, and you're saying, look, we're going to move with the market roughly 4 or 5% increase every year. I don't want to call you up in 3 years' time and say, by the way, we're increasing your rent by $150 a month. Whereas actually, if you do it incrementally, next year, $20 extra a week, next year, $30 extra a week, you know, it's less of a shock when you come back and say, you know, but also if something needs fixing, you've got to fix it because you've got to keep your tenant happy. I look at them like this is a customer. You know, I look at it, this is a business, these are my properties, these are customers living in the properties, right? And that, I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, I'm the landlord and I get to do what I want. You don't get to do what you want unless you're doing all the right things for that tenant. You know, if a cupboard needs fixing, just get it fixed. It might cost you $50. To change that tenant, it's going to cost you far more than keeping that tenant happy and keeping them in. So I just think do your maintenance when they ask. Like I'm a rent investor, right? So I rent here. It's so frustrating when you can't get your landlord to fix something. I've had an extractor fan not working for 9 months now because they can't be bothered to change it.
They can fix that when they come to fix the mould.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, you know, you just sit there, you just think, I would have probably stayed in that house another 2 years had they done it. But now what's going to happen is at the end of the tenancy, I'm going to move and try and find a different property. They're going to spend 2 weeks rent is going to go to the leasing team because that's their fee to get a new person in. They've got to pay marketing fees. They then got to pay their own mortgage for maybe a month.
A vacancy period of changing over.
Period. It's going to cost them thousands just to change. Whereas you could have just
spent $100 on
spent $100 or $200 on a fan and kept the tenant happy, but they didn't. So I think it does work both sides, and I think a lot of people get into property and they just think that they can do what they want by their tenants, and you just can't. You've got to look after them. But you've got to be transparent as well. And I don't see a problem with people signing multiple year leases as well. I know why the leasing teams want to do a 12-month contract. That's because, you know, they might have the opportunity to kick them out at the end of the year and, you know, get someone else in, and they get their 2-week fee again up front. Whereas I would rather have someone say, look, we're going to sign a 3-year lease, but we'll have it written in that we're going to increase your rent by 4% or 5% each year. You've got the opportunity to break if you want to. Because then I know I've got 3 years guaranteed rent. If that's the goal, right? You might have a different goal. You might be renovating or doing something else. You might have builders coming in at some point. But if you're just rent vesting, investing in holding on to it, you know, I don't want to change my tenant. Just leave them in there, keep them happy.
100%.
There you go. One other question that I have before we get to some of the lessons for investors. I'm curious how it's been, I guess, working across a number of jurisdictions and holding a property portfolio within 2 countries.
Yeah, many sort of find it daunting. Like we buy in Perth a little bit recently, and you know we license everyone in Australia, so some people find it daunting to buy sight unseen within the same country. Yeah, you're managing 2 properties
doing it
in London or the UK.
Yeah. I look at property as a spreadsheet, so I think a lot of people they get an emotional attachment to property. I don't have an emotional attachment to property. Where do I see it growing? The amount of money I've put into it, how much am I getting in return? That's just it's all just figures on a sheet. If I never see the property, that's great. In fact, all the properties that I've invested in, I've never seen them. Never drove past them, never seen them at all. They've all just been spreadsheets to me. So I think, get sentimental about your owner-occupier dream home. You know, but if you're buying an investment properties and you're doing the rent vesting strategy, or you're building it, you've got your owner occupier and you want to build wealth for retirement, you don't need to see it. If you've got the right BA who's done the right research, and you've got the right brokers and accountants and formation for your strategy, then you've got nothing to worry about. It doesn't matter where you buy it, whether you buy it in Perth or Townsville or Gold Coast or up the Central Coast, Newcastle areas like that. It doesn't matter as long as the figures stack up. That's all that matters, really.
Great words. So for the defence men and women out there listening, give us your top 1, 3, 5 tips, whatever, for sort of that defence community, and then we'll sort of ask on just holistic property investing after.
I think the first piece of advice that I'd want to give someone in the military is you've got an opportunity for your first 10 years of your career to really save lots of money. Like, a lot of people will join and they're not in a relationship and they don't have dual expenses and kids and all that. And I think a lot of them will have absolutely no advice from their family or friends. And what they'll do is they'll see the guys turning up in the brand new BMW or the new Hilux, and all that money that they've saved by going away on tour or operations or on a ship or wherever it might be, they come back and they spunk it. You've got no rent to pay or very limited low rent to pay on base. You're getting paid a fairly good wage. Arguably, it could be a bit higher.
There's a whole episode on that.
Conversation for another
Leave that
day.
alone.
But you don't have to, like, the super contributions and all the other stuff is handled. Like, if you're in the government sector, you're going to get all that stuff's going to be fairly looked after for you. So what you need to do is figure out, if you left the military and you had $5 million worth of investment, you would have more time to think about what you wanted to do when you left.
Great advice. I like that. Like, whether it's 5, 3, whatever, like if you have the portfolio when you're getting out, because many people do have that fear of change, I guess, and they get comfortable in the defence, and a lot of people want to discharge and chase, a new career, but there's that little bit of fear of the unknown, I guess. But if you're sitting on a nice little portfolio even that's yielding well, and makes, when you've got, whether it's $1 million, 500,000 or whatever of equity sitting there, you've got some money to throw at a problem if it occurs. And normally we do think about worst case playing out that never really does. So
and I think there's you just get caught up in, I need a job as quickly as possible. And if you had 3 or 4 assets that were paying you a good rental income, you would, at least, even if it just covered your basic expenses, food, shelter, fuel in the car, you can take 3-6 months out and really think about what you want to do when you leave. Or even if you're staying in, if you do your 30 years and you're ready to retire and you want to retire young and you want to retire in your 50s, the best way to do that is through property. So I just think there's a real opportunity, if you don't go spending all of your money on stupid things, that you can save a lot of money being in the military, because a lot of your normal expenses are covered. If you're away, you're not spending money on food. If you're away, you're not spending money on accommodation. They're your 2 biggest expenses. Don't have a 2-seater sport car sitting on base that you're
gathering
spending
dust.
Yeah, and you've taken a huge, loan out to get it, and you're not using it that much. So I think that's probably the biggest tip. And then the second one is get a strategy early. So don't save up loads of money and don't, you got to speak to a professional. And I don't mind spending an hour, 2, 3, 4 hours, over the course of several months talking to someone who might not be ready to buy property for another year. But having a strategy and knowing it and having the knowledge is key, because what are you saving for if you don't know what your target is?
Building knowledge over time.
Yeah.
So strategically going hard early and building. And what about for the, just the greater investor community out there listening, just from your experience? And
I just think a lot of people live at the moment, we've had it easy for the last 10 years. Interest rates were 2%, car loans easy to get, credit cards. I just think people live way above their means. And we need to get, this is what's happening at the moment, obviously, with rate rises. What they want to do is they want to shock people back into not spending as much money. And it's working, because I've even seen it myself. My rent's gone up, everything else has gone up, my income, not necessarily. And you do have to cut back. The amount of times I'll have a phone call with someone, they've taken out a novated lease on a car, they've got $30,000 on their credit card, they haven't paid off their HEX debt. All of these things need to be nipped in the bud, and they need to be nipped in the bud early, because there's no point using strategies like novated leases to save tax during your wealth creation phase, that comes when you've got the wealth. Then try and save on tax and set up the company and put all your expenses through it and do all those things, all those strategies to, avoid paying tax. But what a lot of people will do is they'll get to middle income level and they get stuck in that middle income trap.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses, sending the kids to private school, doing all of those things. Yeah, your motives are correct. I get it. I get what you're trying to do. But you don't even own a property yet. The amount of times I see that. Spending $1,500 a week on rent. Driving a $100,000 Mercedes. Don't own an asset. It's crazy to me. But they're also not contributing and topping up their super. They're not doing anything. They're just keeping up with the Joneses. So
It's
I think
terrifying.
for a lot of people, you've got to call a broker. And one thing which I'll do is I'll give them a reality check. So I'm not the broker that's just going to sit there and go, yeah, it's fine, carry on the way you are. The amount of conversations that I'll have with people and I'll say, okay, so you've got no savings. You've got a nice Mercedes sat outside. You're renting for $1,500 a week. What the hell are you doing? It's like you're in your 40s. Grow up. It's not about the shiny thing. You gotta have a bit of a reality check sometimes because.
That, I'm sure that goes down so well.
Yeah,
In
I don't say it
100% of
necessarily
cases.
just like that, but you've got to sit there and realise that if you want to buy the $4 million dream property, 4-bed, swimming pool by the beach, you're not going to do it the other way around. It's just not going to happen. And if you are just in that middle to higher income earner sort of bracket and you're not thinking ahead, you're not going to have anything to leave your kids. How are they going to get into the market? How is that going to help them? It's all very good looking the part, but you can do that after you've built your wealth.
If it's worth doing, everyone would be doing it. So,
yeah, correct. I mean, look, I got people in their 20s. I've got 3 assets already.
Yeah.
If
if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But if it's worth doing, but you got to do it hard to get there.
Yeah, and it's not the rest of your life that you're sacrificing it for. It's maybe 5-year strategy.
But we're also not talking about bread and water for, you can still live a lifestyle and build.
Yeah, you can do both. It's just, maybe buy a $20,000 car in cash, not an $80,000 car on lease. It still gets you to the same place. So I think when people are looking at their borrowing power, at the moment with the rates that they are, you've got high level income earners that can't borrow a lot of money. And I'll sit there and I'll say, look, we've got $1.5 million here that we can lend you. But 5 years ago, we could have lent them $3 million. So they're still expecting to have that borrowing power, but they don't. And it's like, okay, well, actually, if we get rid of the credit card, if we, cut the lease back or use some of your savings to pay off the lease, then we'll get there to the figure that we need, and it might give you an extra $300,000-$400,000 in borrowing power. So yeah, I think that's while the interest rates are high, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest problem that we get anyway. People living above their means.
All things that people should be thinking about, and hopefully have taken the advice from this podcast and can use it to further their own property portfolios, which is what it's all about, really. And you're both working in the property space. You talked a bit earlier about there is a lot more awareness out there. There's going to be people that are younger, that are hungrier, that are keener, that are going to start leapfrogging these people who are already trying to keep up with the Joneses, and that's not sustainable.
No, not sustainable at all. You'd be shocked to the amount of youngsters that I get phone calls from early. They might not even have the money yet. Some of them have only got $10,000 saved up, $20,000 saved up. But we sit there and we strategize them and we say, look, I'll call you in 6 months. Let's book it in the diary just before Christmas. We'll talk then, see where you are. They're not quite ready then. Let's talk in 6 months again. Keep on the saving journey. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing the right thing. We're just not quite ready yet. And you never know. Policies change all the time. You've got first home buyer schemes. You can get into the market with 5%. no stamp duty, no lender's mortgage insurance to pay. Why wouldn't you take advantage of things like that? So there are ways to enter the market. You'll see these things in the news. They're like 20% deposits and blah, blah, blah. You don't need a 20% deposit. You need a 5% deposit to enter the market. Once you've entered the market, then you've got access to all of these opportunities.
We're actually working with a client now. They're in Ormsby, at Latchford Barracks. For those that know, he's an instructor moving up to Townsville. So he's using HPAS, which is the Defence Homeowners Grant, DOHAS, which is the loan, basically, he gets contributions towards the loan, and then also the scheme with 5%, so he's getting in, he'll be buying a property up in North Queensland, relocating into it next year. He'll live in it for 2 years for that posting cycle, meet all these criteria for those grants, and then we'll post away and retain it as an investment. So, the strategic piece in maximising those benefits is
that's why I say you got to call early to find out what schemes have you got access to, what government schemes have I got access to, what military schemes have I got access to, people in the medical industry and things like that, teachers, nurses, police, whatever.
And like you said, calling early is important.
Early.
So you can, if you don't qualify now, what do I need to do to put myself in a position to make sure I can get these benefits? So having that conversation early is important.
The pushback I get is they'll say, I'll call you when I'm ready in about 3 or 4 months' time. And I say, why don't we just pick up the phone now for 15 minutes and I'll figure out, we can strategize when you're ready. Because a lot of time they'll call me and they'll actually, we're not quite ready yet. Or actually,
we've got something.
Yeah, we were ready 3 months ago. Why didn't you call me now?
For being ready.
Yeah. Exactly. Which is why it's good always to pick up the phone and have a chat, because, a lot of people are ready before they think they are.
And it's good to know that people can ring when they're not ready.
Yeah.
That would be, for a lot of people, it's a barrier that they think, I'm not in the right headspace at the moment, I don't have my finances in order, why would I
they think they're wasting your time, or which you're not. At the end of the day, if you do good by us, we'll do good by you. If we do business together in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, it makes no odds. The whole point is to just get people on the right path to build a strategy.
Well, on that, if you're looking to speak with us, if you've got a property story to tell, reach out to Kane at discoverbuyersagency.com.au. We'll put you in touch with Ross from Strategic Brokers as well.
Great way to end the podcast. Put that call out there. I mean, there's got to be so many people listening along that go, I'm in that boat. I don't know where to turn to next. I don't know what the go is. And having both of you in that corner seems like a pretty good start, even if they're not ready to pull the trigger just yet. So thanks for an amazing chat. It's been very enlightening. Cool to hear that it's not just relevant even to really the Australian defence industry as well. You've gone through very similar things in a different jurisdiction, and you're still coming out in a relatively similar way, and it's resulting in you buying properties in Australia. So we might get a few more listeners from England over the next little while.
There's a lot of POMs in Australia.
A few lateral transfers out there.
There's a lot of lateral transfers out there for sure.
But again, thank you so much for a great chat. Kane, as you said, easy to reach out if people want to hear more information.
Yeah, and thanks, Ross. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To everyone who is listening along, we hope you have enjoyed this episode. Until next time, stay safe and well wherever you're listening from. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.